Hey gang, KR King of D&D Homebrew. Today I am continuing my series on the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Those of you that have watched this, I've gone through level 4. I talk about, I recreate the map for my own purposes, talk about entrances and exits and some of the other aspects of it that I think are relevant to building your own mega dungeon. As I say, I don't run modules per se, but I've always liked to get them. First, I used to use the maps, but also to get tips on how to run a mega dungeon, how to have the levels intersect, how to think about how things would move back and forth, and also the arch villain, which in this case is famously Halaster, the Mad Wizard. And I started doing level 5. It has some interesting things that I'm going to cover in future videos. Notably, you've got an arch druid Willow in this on this level, and you've also got this forest that Halaster has created to keep her there, even though she's conscious of this. Sort of, as she's slightly insane herself, but she notably says in the text that she believes that Halaster has gone insane or is of pure magic energy. And it started getting me think about, in terms of the very beginning of the adventure, the setup, but also the first level. They talk about Halaster appearing. He has this roving eye that he can make appear, and he can talk to the players or, ridicule them or say, I'm watching you or whatever. And I started thinking about playing Halaster because, let's say on the 5th level, the group is supposed to be 8th level. And you may be thinking, well, I'm not going to play Halaster. I don't have to play him until either the players get to the I think it's 23rd, the final level, and take him on, or at least closer to that, deeper. A couple of things here. Now, maybe you have a group, you run milestones, you're going to go through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage or Mega Dungeon if you're just doing something. And eventually they're going to get to 20th level and take on Halaster, I suppose. But to me, I'm not necessarily going to run that high. And I'm thinking, well, I want my supervillain. And again, Halaster in the book, so I'm going to look over his stats. He's got a 23 CR, which is interesting because, Taresk has a 30 CR in D&D, and I think Halaster could take out a Taresk. But anyway, I'm not going to go there with the challenge rating system, but let's just say he's super deadly. You look at his spell list, you look at his regional effects and his abilities, and I mean, the guy is super deadly. So you're saying, well, 8th level characters, they're not going to be able to take him on. And yet, when you look at what Halaster can do and what he's doing all the time in terms of keeping this mega dungeon populated, and he helped build it, and he's rebuilding it, and he's appearing with the players, and he has goals that the module states at the beginning. They give you 6 sample goals, whatever you think of those. I'll go over those. But he also has his own goals, right? He's got this, he's insane, I suppose, but he's got, things he's working through, things he's trying to achieve. And I think at some point, the players, we get to 8th, 9th, 10th level, you get to be pretty deadly. Maybe that, they're going to have a long time running at those levels, even though they seem to be just milestones of going through the dungeon. When you add up the experience, it's a little murky. So I'm thinking when I get to this 5th level, I may have Halaster kind of appear more because Willow has an interesting backstory that we'll go into. And Halaster has an interest. Obviously, he has created with his spells. He's used multiple wishes to create this underground forest area. And when I talk about that in the next video, it's not very big. But anyway, he's gone through all this work to sort of keep her happy or whatever. And you start thinking about that in terms of the players interacting with Willow and some thoughts on what they might do with Willow. And so I started looking at, what? Halaster is going to be doing stuff all the time on the Dungeon of the Mad Mage based on his abilities. So what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll look at these abilities and we'll talk about, the sort of things that he might be doing all the time. So this is Halaster's basic stat block that he has in here. And I'm going to look at some of these things. I'm not looking at this necessarily like, okay, it's a monster that you're going to fight, right? I'm not going to say, oh, look at all these spells he has. And again, I apologize how fuzzy this image is. In terms of this is what they say he takes every day, or this kind of stuff with a blast scepter. Oh, he's going to use this, or he's got his legendary action. I'm just talking about Halaster, as a basic, what are the implications of these statistics? So right away, if you go up here, you notice he's got 18s in 3 categories, but he's got a 24 intelligence. Now, this 24 intelligence, it's a little bit like, when we first had the old monster manual, and they talked about, like, the platinum dragon, let's say, as being a super genius was the description of its intelligence. Well, what is a super genius, and how do you run that? I'm a bright person, but I don't consider myself a super genius. So we would do things like, say, whatever plans you had, the dragon would have figured those out and be like waiting for you, whatever. You had to do something that they hadn't thought through, or they just knew tons of stuff. It's really hard. So, Halaster has this 24 intelligence. But the other thing about that is when you have a 24 intelligence and you are insane, as it were, would that make you a megalomaniac, a narcissist? Would that make you arrogant? Would that make you want to show off? Would that make you want to do things such that you actually would not expect the players to do something, clever or off the wall or whatever, in such a way that, you get around the fact that he's going to be able to figure out everything you do. So when you're thinking about what does he do, they give you this information up here, right, about what he does. He knows the ever-changing ways of Undermountain, right? He controls the changes. He likes to remain unseen, but sometimes he comes out and, as we said, sends his scry sensors and talks to people. He also is constantly playing with these gates. If we go to this page, right, he's constantly creating gates, moving them around, casting Elder Runes, which means he could be changing these gates. And this is because again, he has this super intelligence. He's smarter than everyone. If he makes some whim decision that I'm going to change this gate, he will. And the other thing is within his lair actions, right? We think of lair actions, you come across a monster and then it's, regional effects of a certain area. But in fact, or then when you go into its lair, it has these things. But the entire Dungeon of the Mad Mage is Halaster's lair. And we look at these, they say on initiative count of 20, he has these, things like as though you're fighting him, but he has these all the time, right? So you think about how these could be used. So what you notice with these lair actions is that, it says on a roll of 20 initiative, he can just do this at any point, but, he can do these all the time, and he can alter, the structure of the dungeon. And this is the thing, the players move on through. Halaster could block off an entrance to what they went through. He can create stone, he can do this. He could change the gates, he could change the runes. And why wouldn't he do this? And why wouldn't he pay more attention to the players as they gain in level, as they become, gain in renown? Because what percentage of the adventurers that go down into the Dungeon of the Mad Mage make it to, right now I'm just on the 5th, so you say most of them do, I don't know. But, 8th, 9th, 10th, I mean, the whole thing seems kind of like this is a very elite group. But Halaster would be changing things behind him. He has that regional effect power. Why not use it? Because it says that Halaster is constantly lurking in the hallways, moving around, such that he could deactivate a gate or reactivate. In theory, if he changes the way a gate is, you've got to go deeper, and the players discover this. This makes him a presence in the dungeon. And, I have seen the PDF supplement, the Mad Mage Companion, I think it's called, where they treat this like a game show sort of thing. They try to give it a little more motivation. And a lot of players have talked about how the dungeon to them seemed boring. There wasn't enough narrative thrust, or there wasn't enough for them to do. They were just sort of exploring and killing the same kind of monsters or whatever. So this game show idea, and I'm not familiar with it. I've just looked at a description of it on a Reddit post. But the idea there was to give, Halaster and hence the players more goals. Halaster's watching them and interacting. Well, I think the way to do that, if you don't want to run that companion, and because I looked at it, it seemed a little hokey, but I haven't read it. It might be great. Maybe the comments of people that have run it. But the idea there is that Halaster is an active part of the dungeon, such that he has this eye, the roving eye, and he's communicating to the players, taunting them or talking to them or whatever. He isn't just a big bad guy, and you look at all his spells and they have a battle. And if they're not 20th level, they lose. Or they're not 15th and have some clever thing, they lose, or whatever, right? They're interacting with him, and he's going to do things. And maybe he gives them clues about things. Maybe when he realizes how powerful, or, they're very clever, or they've done something that impressed him, maybe he gives them something. Maybe he warns them about some aspect of a level. Maybe he tells them where a gate is. I don't know. Maybe he lies, but he's got this one-eye roving thing, and he can appear to the players and sort of goad them and pick on them. And they don't mention this often in the text, and I think it's important when you're running your big bad villain. He must be, in a way, omnipresent. This isn't a movie that's 2 hours, so the big villain appears in the midpoint and the players meet him, or the people, the protagonists in the movie, and then he leaves, and then they meet him at the end for the showdown and kill him. This is a long-running, months and months. This is a campaign, right? So there has to be a presence. He leaves things around. Maybe he recreates some monsters with messages about when you see those players do X, or they communicate with the players. Because here's another thing. He is restocking this dungeon so that you can, put new things in. Again, the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, you may just want to run, and go back up, run. You don't want to be fighting things on level 5 and level 7 or whatever after you've already gone through. I get that. But I'm thinking of a mega dungeon. I'm thinking of something that you've created. You've got a big bad villain with some of these abilities. So you might first look at these regional effects. They're not that overwhelming, right? Just obviously he has his scrying eye that appears. He can face, basically watch the players, follow them, whatever. These other things, minor illusory effects of rattling chains or sounds or footprints or these silent apparitions of dead adventurers. What do? Well, I think that they add to atmosphere. Now, this silent apparition thing is really cool because what it can be is the things that the players have killed. Let's say drow, or let's say, something with a personality or something. And this silent apparition, and maybe it follows the player. It doesn't just drift through the hallways, but it's there watching them. And there's nothing they can do. Maybe it doesn't harm them. There's nothing they can do, and they just grow and grow. And this is the way that Halaster, or your big villain, is telling the players what they've done. Again, it's just atmosphere, but they put it in there for a reason because it kind of freaks you out. And these minor illusions can be used to fool the players such that they hear things or trace things. They don't know that these minor illusions are coming from Halaster. Maybe eventually they figure it out. But it's important, you read this and you think about Halaster, and especially as they go deeper, to have more of these. Maybe there's a ton in the first level just to scare people away, but as you go deeper, Halaster becomes conscious, Halaster appears more, and you do get these creepy effects more. And here's an ability they've got that I think is kind of cool for any big bad villain type, Rejuvenation, where if he dies in the Undermountain, he revives after 1d10 days. All his hit points, any missing body parts restored. And he's in a random safe location in Undermountain. Now, it doesn't say where the Rejuvenation ability comes from. And again, this presumes that somehow the players have defeated Halaster at some point, however that's going to be. And you've got to figure that out because he does reappear and he's going to be pissed, right? But it's a classic thing to make a villain a super deadly villain that you just can't sneak up, put all your spells together, figure out some way, blast it, it's dead, it's gone, haha, we win. Oh, no. It has Rejuvenation ability and it's going to reappear. So you're going to have to figure out a way to, remove that ability or somehow thwart it. Now, notice here this horned ring that Halaster wears. Now, in terms of the game mechanics, it allows you to ignore the Undermountain's magical restrictions in terms of teleport spells and whatnot. Very powerful. It also has a long history in the Forgotten Realms. Halaster handed out them to his 9 apprentices, and I think Jasira Kesselharp still has one, although she's now lost her material form or whatever. But it's really cool because what this does from a game mechanics is he's got all these restrictions, but he can zip and zap, teleport, appear anywhere he wants. Now, they could have just said he can do this, for whatever reason. But they gave him this item, which again, you think, well, I'm going to have this horned ring that's going to, I'm going to take this, well, best of luck. But what it does is it explains why he's doing this and why he can wander around and why he can also appear to the players. I mean, you think that the big villain has got to protect himself. He doesn't appear. He's always just some projection or something. But he could just appear to them. He could just say, so what's going on? He's there, right? Because he's not afraid of them, per se. And at any moment, he can detour away or teleport or whatever, such that he's not really under any threat because he has this ring. And this is a really great thing about having these restrictions, but having your big villain be immune to them. You know, another thing about this prepared list that Halaster has, obviously he has other spells, right? In fact, you might say over the course of time, he's pretty much found all the spells that are in the book. And what that means is if you want to stick strictly to this when the players encounter him or he wanders around these or what he has, that's okay. But you can also have, you know, the private sanctum, I think Mordecai's private, whatever that is, sanctum spell, that if you cast every day in a spot, suddenly that area, that's permanent, right? And there's other spells that are permanent. And what you may want to do is look at those spells. A programmed illusion, you know, occurs whenever this happens, an illusion of him being there. That's what we think of, you know, Halaster says, you know, hello, welcome to this or whatever. But, you know, there can be other programmed illusions, other things that he's done. You know, a wall of stone is permanent after a certain amount of time. You look those up, see those permanent spells. I'm thinking of the Sanctum one, which can be, I think, up to 100 feet, that he can create effects, you know, that are permanent, that he would do this. He would have certain attributes. So when you have all of those spells in the book, in theory, that Halaster has, it gives you an opportunity to look at them and think about some of the effects that might occur if, in fact, you had that capability and you are, in theory, immortal or pure energy or whatever Halaster really is, which means you've got all the time in the world. And I think as the players advance, when they get down multiple levels, think about goals that Halaster or missions or whatever. Don't just think of him as this evil creature that they have to get to and defeat at the end of the, you know, exploring all the levels, but think of him as this presence such that he interacts with the players. Maybe he tempts them. Maybe he gives them a great reward. Maybe he does something for them. You know, and it isn't just, you know, that he's maybe he's always out to drive them insane. Like they talk about the goal with the apprentice and all his apprentices, he's eventually turned on themselves or whatever, you know, power corrupting. Absolutely. Okay. But maybe there's a way that this big bad villain can give the players something such that maybe if they walk away, you know, they get something more out of this. And they also, if they walk away, if you've got this as a set place, they do something for Halaster, the Mad Wizard. Again, he's by definition mad, but let's just say your big bad villain. Maybe then they can interact or do a deal or come back at some point or whatever. They have a friend, as it were, that runs this dungeon. It doesn't always just have to be you got to get to the end and finish. And here's another aspect of this. When we used to have mega dungeons, and I had, I think, a 12-level mega dungeon in the original game, and I had players go down to about 5th or 6th level. And, you know, part of it was we got tired of running dungeons, but part of it was just going to take forever. And a lot of the little, setups that I had and little modules and everything, I transported to other smaller dungeons. That became kind of our modus operandi. Or I, converted it, like a play that you convert to a movie. I converted that to an outside thing. And that's something that you can do both with the things that are in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, but the Mad Mage himself, this idea of this super powerful, figure with these abilities, give those, the legendary actions and the regional effects, give those to some other creature that you have out there using the Mad Mage as a template. So those are just some ideas on how to run Halaster the Mad Mage when you're not necessarily going to have the players do a final confrontation. But he is a presence. He is there in the dungeon. He has his scrying eye. He can appear as an illusion. He can have programmed illusions, all sorts of things where he's telling the players, ha-ha, I'm watching you. I know what you're doing, which unnerves them in terms of, he's following us all. There's no way we're ever going to surprise this guy. And some of the creepy, illusionary effects or all the things that they've killed, haunting them, this sort of thing. So if you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. And if you like what you've seen, hey, subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. Leave me some comments. Again, I'd love to hear how people use Halaster at the levels where the players, there's no way they're going to take him on. And, of course, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.